So my name's Carl Binder, and this is our monthly free webinar. This is the 28th one we've done. We've been doing it over 2 years. And this is in some ways a sort of a redo, but not really. We did a webinar some months ago on employee engagement and servant leadership. And we'll cover some of the same ground here, except from a slightly different angle, I think. Because as you'll see, one of the questions that you've probably observed also, but as we watch, the social media and news and so forth, there's, and especially business news, a lot of conversations about employee retention because people are leaving. The great resignation continues. And so the whole issue around employee retention is a big deal, especially in this current economy, even though we keep seeing sort of better unemployment numbers and all of that. One of the questions that does come up, and it certainly comes up with senior executives, is, well, in order to retain employees, can we still have productive people? Are those two things opposed to one another? Is there some inconsistency? And so that's kind of what we want to drill into a little bit and give you a performance thinking perspective on it. Before we get into that, though, we've got some webinars coming up. One of the things we've been doing over the last few years is looking at organizations as they grow rapidly from small to large, and particularly in the behavioral health applied behavior analysis world, where people are serving folks on the autism spectrum and elsewhere. There's been an enormous growth from companies that might have 3 people to several years later be in 22 states. And so we've been using that as a little bit of a case study, but in general, looking at companies as they grow. And we have this phrase that we started using a few years ago, performance infrastructure, by which we mean well-defined job roles, processes that are documented and optimized, and all the other things in place in an organization to really support optimal performance. And so we want to talk a little bit about the stages of development as companies grow and what some of the performance infrastructure challenges are. We're also going to touch on in a webinar in some more depth. We'll touch on a little bit today, actually, but this whole idea that you work for your manager, not the company, that ultimately, that's who pulls the strings in terms of your work environment. We also want to talk about systemic performance intervention. You see a lot of uses these days of the word systemic. I see it particularly in areas that involve social justice, for example, or criminal justice, people being, murdered by the police in the streets and so forth. And you see people saying, well, we need a systemic intervention. Well, what does that really mean? It sounds good, but we're going to investigate that a little bit. And there will be some other topics also. Next month, we want to do something, and I can see that my colleague, Therese Longo, is here, and so this will touch on some of her work probably. But what we've recognized over the years is that our accomplishment-based approach, which defines jobs in terms of the contributions or the things that people contribute, rather than their skill sets necessarily or their competencies, provides a very nice framework for defining jobs. And so both sort of as people come into the organization, where you're ramping them up in onboarding to perform well, and also in succession planning, where people are moving replacements into jobs, particularly in senior levels, where you have to select and bring in people in a succession planning process. And what we've observed is that there's a toolkit that we have that can be used at both ends of that. So I think you might find that pretty interesting. We also, and those of you who are here certainly know this, but we have our YouTube channel at performancethinking.tv. It's easier to remember than looking for the Performance Improvement Insights channel on YouTube. Just go to performancethinking.tv, or for that matter, 6 Boxes TV will get you there. And we've got these webinars, we've got shorter videos, we've got presentations. We just put recently an announcement of our new collaboration with Dennis Murphy, who was Vice President of Business Performance at Amgen, and we worked with him for years in that role. And he's now entering his 3rd career as a consultant, and we're going to be collaborating with him. So there's a lot of stuff, including a little announcement video of that on our YouTube channel. So let's take a look at the agenda today. Let's talk a little bit about why people leave, why they leave their jobs, and why that's an issue. And then the question that I want to pose and sort of address here is, and I think for some executives, this is a real issue, and some HR folks, can we both retain our people and expect them to be productive? I mean, from a sort of a simplistic perspective, it sounds like, well, we'd like you to work here, but we want you to work really hard. And so how do those two things fit together? And one of the things is that it's really not just one thing. You keep seeing articles and publications where they say, well, it's really about this or that or the other thing. It's not one thing. It's a whole system of factors that have an influence. And it is related to the fact that we ultimately work for our managers and leaders that we report to. And so then I want to talk a little bit about how performance thinking can be helpful, and then we'll see if there's some Q&A or some discussion afterwards. I hope so. Here's something from Microsoft fairly recently saying that 41% of the global workforce are considering a job change in the next year, with 46% planning to make a major career transition. And that's a big deal. That's a big number. And given that people estimate the cost of replacing people as pretty high, that's a big cost for organizations. Now, there's lots of reasons that people leave, and this is just one set of them from the Work Institute, a piece that was on the web about human resource forecast. And career development is one of the biggest reasons that they've found that people don't feel they have a career path or career development opportunities. The second one is manager behavior. They just don't necessarily like working for the managers they're working for. And then there's issues around work-life balance and well-being and characteristics of the job itself. Interestingly, although some of the polls I've seen put more pay as one of the highest reasons, this particular survey suggested that compensation benefits are important, but not one of the top ones necessarily. And then there's various other factors. But, there's a lot of reasons that people quit. The Work Institute, however, said something that's pretty stunning if you reflect on it, which is that 75% of the reasons for turnover are preventable. Now, I've cited these data more than once in other contexts, but I'm always stunned whenever I read it because I think, wait a minute, if we could even prevent a third of those, or a half of those that are preventable, that would be worth a lot of value in an organization. So the question really is for executives and managers and leaders, can we do both? Can we keep people, but also have them productive? And this is how I would like to kind of unpack this topic. So first of all, what are some of the things we can do? If you look at that list of reasons people leave, there's lots of possible reasons. They may want more money and they've got a better deal, They may not have development opportunities or very clear career paths that they can follow. Can we clarify that? Can we make that easier for people? Can we provide more recognition, more respect, more consequences, essentially positive feedback and consequences? Can we just simply create a nicer place to work? Now, of course, these days, the nice place to work for many people is at home. And so there's a whole issue around hybrid and, can we be virtual or do you have to come into the office and all that? So that's a factor for many people. Another one that we've observed often is that there's a fair number of jobs out there where people are working as part of, contributing to processes and or they're using systems that are really miserable. I mean, I was working with a sales organization recently, and I looked at their implementation of Salesforce.com, and it was like wading through thick mud to try to even use it. There was so much stuff that was kind of, dumped in there that what we heard actually was that salespeople tended to, for example, complete their account plans and then kind of put them in the drawer because they really didn't find Salesforce useful. If anything, it was a time sink and it wasn't helpful to them. So there's a lot of cases like that where people are working in processes or they're dealing with tools that just don't work. Health and well-being. These days, of course, Elon Musk is in the news a lot, and he claims to work 80 to 100 hours a week. And he says, if you work twice as much, you'll get twice as much done and your company can move faster. And that might be fine for the owner or the CEO if he's willing to, risk his health. But he even says he's risking his health. And at the other end of the spectrum, just we ordinary folks, there's a health and well-being issue. And so how does that work out in terms of our job environments? A lot of people talk about the culture and the purpose of an organization. So if we clarify the mission of the organization and the values that we espouse here and really practice them, that's also a factor for many people. More time off, you can't move to Europe. Maybe you could move to a company that has more paid family leave and more vacation time. Maybe we're just getting the wrong people up front. Maybe our hiring practices are capturing, bringing in people who want the job, but it's actually not that good of a fit. Another issue that people bring up, and I think this might be accentuated over the course of the pandemic, which is more opportunities to connect with other people, even though we enjoy working at home and maybe connecting with our family members in some cases, working at home instead of in the office. It's also the case that there's a lot of organizations and work where people are kind of isolated, basically, either with their headsets on or some other factor. So maybe simply more opportunities to work with, socialize, collaborate with others, better benefits, better leadership and management. These are all things, okay? And they're all, depending on what article you read, they're also suggested as opportunities for improvement. But I just want to emphasize, it's never just one thing. It's not just one thing. It may be for a given individual, but overall, from an organizational point of view, if we're trying to manage this, if we're trying to improve retention and optimize engagement and keep people productive as well, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And those of you who know about performance thinking recognize that we view the world through the lens of the 6 boxes model anyway, where there's a whole bunch of factors, and we'll come to that. Now, this is one of the more striking things, and everybody kind of knows this, that you work for your manager. But I was struck by this report called The American Manager from the Gallup organization that says the manager accounts for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement, and 50% of Americans have left a job to get away from their managers at some point in their career. So that's a pretty big deal. Now, I just pulled this funny joke off of the internet. Alice, I want you to interview a job candidate. Let me know what you think. And so she asks him, why did you leave your last job? Well, I punched my boss. So she goes back and says, he's exactly what we need. Apparently, she's not too happy with her boss. But this point about managers is an important thing. So the question is our management practices, given that people perceive themselves to work for their managers, is that where a lot of the opportunity is to retain people and also to make them more productive? So that kind of sets up the topic, the issue, what I want to talk about. What I want to investigate is how the models and the logic of performance thinking can be helpful. So those of you who know about this already do, but I want to talk about it a little bit. This is our first of our 2 models. We call it the performance chain. What it says is that there are things that we call behavior influences, all the factors that influence people's behavior, and those affect behavior, activity, what we do, and that behavior, if it's the right behavior, produces what Tom Gilbert called accomplishments or work outputs, valuable products. And those might be concrete things like deliverables. They might be transactions like sales or loans or that sort of thing. They may be decisions, which seem intangible, but they're definitely things, and they're high value things that people produce in all kinds of levels, all kinds of jobs. Milestones is a word that we use when we talk about processes. So in processes, either that an individual executes or that a group does, there are things that are produced at each step along the way, and we call those milestones. Relationships, which continues to be one of our most popular webinars we did almost 3 years ago or 2 years ago, I guess. Relationships is valuable accomplishments. Those are outputs, and your working relationships are very important. Changes and innovations, new things, prototypes, new ideas, etc. Products of communication, those are things like, decisions, and sometimes there are things like, an appointment. You call somebody, which is an activity, and at the end of it, you get an appointment. There's a whole lot of things where we're supposedly communicating with people, training or presenting to them or calling them. And those are designed to produce valuable outputs and so forth. So those are the work outputs. Those are the valuable things that people contribute. And they're valuable to the extent that they contribute to business results. So this is what we call the anatomy of performance. It's the elements, the units of analysis, the things that we want to be really clear on as we begin to look at performance, whether we're performance consultants or managers and leaders. And then the second piece is how we make sense. The second model is how we make sense of those behavior influences. And again, many people are familiar with this model. I created it in the early 1980s in response to Thomas Gilbert's behavior engineering model, which was conceptually similar, but the labels of it were not easy for people to understand. There was a lot of misunderstanding. So we spent a few years tweaking the labels until we came up with these labels for each of the cells of this model. And what we've learned is that it's very straightforward to teach people. People can learn about it. There's a lot of subtlety in it that you learn over time. But at the basic level, you can learn about this framework, and you can you can sort all the things that influence behavior into these cells. And I was trained as a behavior scientist almost 50 years ago at Harvard, and then I got into performance improvement and instruction in the 80s. But over the course of my consulting and sort of research and development career, I have never seen anything that we can do to or with people, in other words, to influence their behavior, that doesn't sort into these categories. So this is a very complete, accessible model. It's got the things on the top row, which are all the things in the environment, how you get expectations for your performance, how you're getting feedback, all the sources of feedback, some of them explicit, some of them sort of implicit. And then box 2, which is all those things that enable you to perform as you go. And those are things like software and tools and reference materials. They may also be people who are helpful, human resources. They might be things like having enough time or ventilation, or the physical environment arranged efficiently, or the process and workflow designs. There's a lot in box 2, and it's really important. It could be one of the reasons that people finally get tired of jobs, because they're having to sort of work against rather than with the tools and resources available in their work sites. And then consequences and incentives, which are the motivating events that happen in the environment. And some of them are explicit, things like compensation, some things like having your boss say thank you or good job. Some of them are not planned and implicit. They might be because you've got a bad tool or process in box 2 that is very unpleasant to use. It has an unintended negative consequence, so people try to avoid it. And of course, our emphasis is to try to arrange all these conditions so that people will make contact with the natural consequences, so they'll be successful in their work, so they'll be happy and confident and successful that they produce the things they're supposed to. And of course, if they were hired in a way that aligned with their values and the mission of the company they cared about and all of that, then they'll probably be often just producing your accomplishments, your contributions successfully is a natural consequence. So there's a lot in that cell. And then in the bottom row, there's all the things that have to do with the individual. Does the individual have the skills and knowledge that are needed? And it's not the training box, because there's a lot of ways you can get skills and knowledge. How do we enable people with the skills and knowledge that they need? And sometimes we can give them a tool, box 2, like a reference document or a checklist, and that will enable them. And then we have selection and assignment. And this could be a factor in the retention issue. If we don't hire people well suited to their jobs, then they may burn out in a while. And I'm sure probably everybody has had and seen stories, about selection that went wrong. For example, many people recognize it in fields like sales or engineering. When you have extremely skilled and capable and productive individual contributors, one of the ways often that they can make more money is becoming managers. Well, there's a lot of engineers that don't really want to become managers. They like doing the work. And there's a lot of salespeople who really would rather be closing the deals than helping other people do it. And so you promote them into those management roles, and it's not a good fit. And sometimes you have people, after a reorganization, for example, a shuffle of staff, where people wind up in seats that the company didn't want to fire them, but it wasn't the perfect fit. And I actually have some colleagues who in the last year have left their companies because they liked the companies, but they were reassigned to another job for various reasons, and they just didn't like it. So they went someplace else where they could do something that they liked better. So selection and assignment is a big deal. It's also related to the thing about values and culture, because if we hire people explicitly aligned with the values of the culture, Steve Jobs used to say um, he didn't want people to work at Apple because they got paid more than any place else. He wanted them to work there because they loved Apple products. And a lot of companies, the mission is very compelling for people that work there. And so we need to select and assign people based on their capacity to do the work, but also based on their motives and preferences and their skills and knowledge, which are the two boxes to the right and left of that in the 6 boxes model. And then box 6, which we're going to come back to, is motives and preferences. It's for the individual. What do they care about? What's a positive consequence for them? Maybe it wasn't so nice, even though maybe everybody else thinks it's a positive consequence. It might not be for them. Lots of examples there too. I working in a high-tech company at one point with our management program, we had a group of managers and a few directors who had managers reporting to them in our program. And I remember one manager saying, this is a software development team in this case, he said, I have one person in my group who is a single parent and who really likes being home when the kids get home from school. And so that can't normally work, 52 weeks out of the year for various reasons. But if we have a very successful project and that person did super well, and we want to kind of have a reward, I'll say, hey, take a week and have flex time so you can be home with your kids. That was, for that person, a bigger positive consequence than probably more money or a trip to Hawaii with the president or whatever would have been. And similarly, you get people who win the big award, but they don't really care about the big award unless it's just money. If it's something like, again, President's Club trip to someplace, maybe they don't like to travel. So we ought to be sure we understand the motives and preferences of people so we can not only arrange consequences and incentives for them that work, but also set expectations, provide feedback, all of that kind of stuff. And values fit in there. Are my personal values aligned with the company's? And also you'll see the word attitude, which we will come back to. But what we've always said and observed is that attitude is kind of the residual impact over time of experience working in that particular company or environment. So that if it's all working well, people are pretty happy and they like it to walk in the door in the morning. And if it's not working so well, they may not be so happy. So that's the 6 boxes model. And most people are familiar with it. It's kind of easy to use in a way, because even if you use it in an imperfect way, it gives you a picture of all the factors that influence behavior. And of course, we use it and teach it to both performance consultants and leaders, managers, and supervisors in ways that are quite specific and actionable. And of course, we can dig into this. This is more details about what the factors are. If we want to enable productivity, if we want to be sure people are being productive, these are the things that fit into those cells that we ought to try to have in place. Now, if you put the two models together, we have what we call performance thinking logic or performance improvement logic. And really, again, those of you who know about this work, or you can look at some of the YouTube videos, but what you probably know is that this evolved from human performance technology that emerged in the 70s and out of instructional technology. And it was called Human Performance Technology, or HPT, at the International Society of Performance Improvement. And that was my sort of home professional organization for about 35 years. And at one point, it was a robust, wonderful organization with all the great thought leaders. And the great thought leaders all had their models, and they got more and more complicated. And so I started in the late 80s to try to distill the essentials from those models down to something that ordinary folks could sort of understand and apply. And this is, that's where this came from. What you're looking at are the two models of performance thinking, the performance chain, and then the 6 boxes model, which makes sense out of behavior influences. And we use it in a lot of ways, but when we're doing analysis, when we're trying to problem solve, when we're trying to optimize performance, we always start out at the far right. Like, what's at stake here for the organization, for the business? And then what are the work outputs that the individual or the team or the process need to produce to contribute to those? And then what behavior do they need, to produce those outputs? And we look for best practices behavior. And then let's take a look at the behavior influences and see what's working and what's not. And this and human performance improvement in general is a time-tested methodology for improving productivity. I mean, we have companies all over the world that use our explicit methodology, the performance thinking approach, to do this. We have a company, major biotech company, been using it for over a dozen years, has had something like 300 certified performance thinking practitioners. It's global. There are hundreds of projects. The reputation in that company is, if you want to do it right, if you want to improve performance in some way or establish performance or do change, use this methodology. It works. It produces productive, effective performance. So we know we've got productivity handled. That's one way to think about this. But let's think about, getting back to the managers thing and the retention thing. Let's think about that, because one of the beauties of the models that I just showed you, as we always say, the 2 pictures in 21 plain English words, is that anybody can understand them. And we've had frontline, high school educated, even not very good English in some cases, factory workers, people working on the assembly line. And we've also had senior executives in different countries even, using this framework. And they all can learn it and apply it in ways that are applicable for their own level of participation in organization. And certainly for leaders, managers, and supervisors at any level, this framework turns out to be very applicable. Now, if you begin to consider these models that I just laid out for you, particularly the 6 boxes model, you remember I mentioned attitude in box 6. And one of the things we've learned over the years, just experientially, just over about 30 some years, or maybe more, is that if we manage the first 5 cells of this in relationship to some performance or an employee or a group of employees, and the things in the first 5 boxes are positive and aligned, we get pretty happy campers at the end. So if you reflect on your own participation, in any work, if the expectations are pretty clear about what you're supposed to do and produce, if you're getting fairly frequent feedback, and a lot of it is positive, recognizing good stuff, and some of it's corrective for sure, and if you have tools, resources, processes, job designs, access to people, all the things in box 2 which will support effective performance, so that you do not feel frustrated or abandoned, then you'll be feeling pretty good about that. And if there's some recognition, if there's some consequences and incentives that are positive, not just, oh, you did that wrong, or not just avoiding, deadline, missing deadlines and so forth, but positive recognition, even if it's just at the level of thank yous from your boss and celebratory events when the team succeeds and so forth, that's going to be pretty good. And if you have opportunities to develop skills and knowledge and a career path and development, and if you're fairly well suited for the role that you've been assigned, you're going to be pretty positive by and large. This is what we've just observed. And I think most people can relate to that. However, if as a company, if as leaders or managers from the top all the way down through the various ranks of management, if we don't manage those first 5 boxes well, if expectations are in conflict, if your manager tells you to do one thing, but there's a policy that suggests you can't do that, if you're told to do something, but you're not given the resources to do it, if you work your tail off on weekends and nights, and you succeed and nobody even notices, there's no consequences. If you really don't have an opportunity to develop the skills that you need, I've seen data recently that say that some large portion of employees, something like 60 or 70% in companies, don't feel like they've been given the opportunity to develop the skills that they need for their job, which is really a stunning thing if that's true, because the amount of money that's spent on training is a big number. And if people are kind of put into jobs that they're really not that well suited for, and they don't have an alternative way to get out of it and do something else, then they're going to kind of look like that young lady. They're not going to be too happy. So we've learned that over the years. We've definitely learned that there's something about one's attitude that's an effect of the whole system working all those factors. But the Gallup employee engagement data, which have been collected for a long time, suggests there's a little more to it than that. And this is the so-called Gallup 12 employee engagement survey. And it's a set of statements that employees rate from 1, which is not at all, to 5, which is sort of a whole bunch. I know what is expected of me at work. I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. In the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. There's someone at work who encourages my development. At work, my opinions seem to count. They're recognized. The mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. My associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. I have a best friend at work. In the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. And this last year, I've had an opportunity at work to learn and grow. Those 12 statements, people in organizations, they're given a survey and they rate from 1 to 5. And before we get into it, though, what I've noticed lately is kind of interesting. There's all these kind of academic discussions, I think, in the HR literature, in business literature and so forth about, well, engagement is not really it. That's the wrong way to think about it. We're talking about retaining employees, and that's a different thing, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So the question is that the right word? Is the Gallup data, right thing to be looking at? Well, what I would say is you can name it anything you want, but let's take a look at the data and see what the results of this survey predict. Because what I would suggest is that people's response to that survey I just showed you, very elegant, time-tested, 12-item survey, are fairly compelling. The organizations that score in the top quartile are 25% in the Gallup 12, have less absenteeism, lower turnover rates, lower shrinkage or stealing, et cetera. They have higher customer ratings. To highlight that, they have better employee retention and they have greater employee productivity. So you can call it engagement. I just call it the Gallup 12, These data are highly predictive. They're predictive of these outcomes. And not only those outcomes, but also profitability and market share and such. There's data that also shows that the response to this really elegant little survey predicts these things. So again, I don't want to quibble over words. If you want to call it something else, that's fine. But people's response to this survey predict a better employee retention and greater employee productivity. Now, one of the things that we recognize, I learned about the Gallup survey maybe 12 years ago or something like that. And it's been used for, I think, several decades. But as I read through the items, I said, wait a minute, this looks very familiar. These items, you could quibble exactly over where to sort them. And I think because all the things that are there are the 12 items from the Gallup survey. You might sort them in a little bit differently. You might put some of them in multiple cells, but they sort with remarkable sort of alignment into the 6 boxes model. And if you go back to this issue about, it's your manager that you work for, it's your leaders that you work for. We, some years ago, started to do an investigation, and we would work with groups of people when we were delivering our management program, and we'd say, what do leaders do? What are some of the things that leaders do? And we'd collect information on a flip chart, and they would say stuff like they provide a vision, they give guidance, they set examples, they drive results through other people, they align goals and so forth. You can read it. Those are some of the things that leaders do. And then we asked the same question about managers, and we actually got more stuff. But a lot of it is the same. It's maybe at a different level. But managers provide feedback, make plans, set goals, find and assign qualified employees, and so forth. So these are all things that managers and leaders do. And if you do this exercise yourself, if you work in a group of people and you go in and you say, hey, let's brainstorm, what do people do in these roles? You'll get stuff like this. So we looked at this, and we looked at it in terms of the employee engagement data, or the data from Gallup. And, first thing is, we recognize that almost every one of those statements on those flip charts are about behavior influences that leaders and managers are arranging for their people. Now, this is not rocket science, really. This is not a big surprise. Although one of the things that we've seen over the years in our management and coaching and leadership programs is that a lot of people who get promoted into management roles don't really get that their job, at least takes them a while to get, that their job is about arranging conditions for other people to perform well. They sometimes, like in high tech environments, for example, I've consulted to software companies that hired really smart people. And so you had a whole bunch of people in the room who used to be the smartest people in the room, and now they're all together. And when they get made into managers, a lot of times it seems that they think they're just supposed to be the smartest engineer in the team, which may be helpful, but that's not their job. And the same thing when people become supervisors, or when they become managers, like sales managers is another great example. I think I mentioned it earlier, where, you know, sales guys are really good at whatever they're doing. Sales persons, women and men, and they get promoted to be the manager of the team, and they just think they're supposed to be the closers. Well, no, they're not. They're actually supposed to step back and help other people perform well. And in fact, my director of major accounts, John Skank, who used to be senior vice president of sales at Dun& Bradstreet, and we've been working together now for quite a few years. One of the things he said to me more than once, he said, I'm not the greatest salesperson in the world, but I'm pretty good at managing and leading and enabling sales teams to work. And so that's the perfect fit, because somebody might not have the killer instinct that it really takes some salespeople in some fields to be successful. But if they're really good people, and if they know how to arrange conditions to help their people perform, that's a good fit. So anyway, the story is, that's the job of leaders and managers, to arrange conditions for their people. So again, let's take a look at the Gallup 12, and you notice that these things that sort into it are all basically descriptions of behavior influences that are available. And so let's sort that in a little bit more detail. So some years ago, and by the way, I can make this available to you now. This is available. You should now be able to download a copy of this if you check on your screen. And it's actually a pretty precious document of ours. It's one of those things that I'm always a little bit skeptical about sharing too widely, because it's really a piece of our intellectual property. It's what we've learned is that if you want to think about leaders and managers as people who arrange behavior influences for their people to be productive and engaged, then these are the things that they will do. They'll articulate a vision. They'll link vision to strategy, daily activity, to work out with some business results. They'll set clear goals and expectations. They'll align expectations up and down, so you hear something consistent from the vice president with what you hear from your immediate supervisor. They'll lead by example. You'll say, the boss is doing it too. I'm going to do it like him or her. They model their values. They use metrics that are meaningful, instead of some formula that nobody understands what it is. They use that for feedback, and they teach their people to give feedback. They also provide suggestions for improvement, not just critical feedback. And they try to find more stuff that their people are doing well, which is usually pretty easy to find, than the corrective negative feedback stuff. So that's just box one. And in box two, they try to be sure in their teams, their departments, their business units, that the processes are working well, that the workflow makes sense. I've done projects, for example, where sales and marketing were not working so well together. And we looked at the process by which they develop marketing materials, and it's no wonder, because the salespeople didn't even have input at the appropriate point into the marketing materials and programs. And so they weren't very customer friendly. And so, you got to fix that. And you have to insist that the tools and resources be improved. You have to really, if you're a middle manager, for example, and you're being asked to have your team use a really bad system of some kind, you need to be outspoken about that. You need to do whatever it takes to try to get those things fixed. You need to support knowledge sharing. In fact, one of our new affiliate, Dennis Murphy, who was used to command 6 nuclear subs in the nuclear sub navy. He's a big believer and proponent of the learning organization. And so knowledge management and active sharing is a big part of what he brings to people. You need to be accessible as a resource. You need to actually be available to people. One of our client companies years ago, in fact, under Dennis's leadership in that company, started a program called Purposeful Presence on the Floor. And the idea was get the managers out of their offices looking at their spreadsheets and get them with people. So they observe, they can provide feedback, they can actually be engaged with their people. Help other people to be leaders and mentors. So you can go through this whole thing and you can look at it fairly carefully. And as I say, you can download it now if you'd like to. But the question is, how you doing? How you doing with it? So, and this is where we can perhaps get somewhat actionable. And I'd like to kind of give you a suggestion, which is if you are an individual contributor in a team or a department, then you can look at what the management practices are that you're living amidst, if you will. And if you are a supervisor or a manager or a leader, you might consider this list and see, like, what are you doing? What could you improve on? And if you, for example, are a director level person or a VP level person, and you've got a bunch of managers or directors working for you, so you've got a team of managers and leaders that work for you, you might well want to get together with your team and use this periodically and say, what stuff are we doing really well here as a group? What practices are we really practicing? And they're part of our daily kind of way we do stuff around here. And then you might say, well, which ones are we not? Are we mostly not taking the time to find good stuff and mostly giving critical feedback? Are we a little fuzzy about how we set goals? It's a classic experience as a performance consultant that I'll talk to managers and leaders and I'll say, how do you set expectations for your people? Are the goals clear and all that? I say, oh yeah, crystal clear. We're always saying this. We got them up in the PowerPoints. We say it at blah, blah, blah. And then you go to people and they say, I don't know, man. He says an awful lot of stuff, but I'm not sure what the expectation is. So you want to be sure that these things are actually, from the point of view of the people you're leading and managing, happening. And so take a look at these things and think about opportunities to improve. And in fact, I have a little suggestion for you, which is that you could follow this kind of a process, which is, let's say you could be an individual leader manager, but it would be ideal if you had a group of leaders or managers, maybe reporting up to a single director or VP or whatever, and they got together and they went down that list and they said, which ones are we doing really well? Let's celebrate that a little bit. And let's also identify those amongst us who are really good at it and recognize them and maybe emulate them, learn from them, say, how are you doing that? How do you set goals with your team? And share that. And then maybe select something in each of the cells there where you think, we're not doing so great. Let's find some that we think we can improve, and let's brainstorm some specific ways we can improve those things. And then let's have an agreement. Let's say, okay, we're going to all try working on these, and we'll kind of keep in touch about it. And let's meet in a month or so, check back, see how it went, and maybe stay in touch in the meantime in case we learn new things and get back together and just keep doing this. It's a very simple idea, but if those practices represent both the things that will optimize productivity and engagement, as suggested by the Gallup data, then you got a winner here, because you've got a framework which will help you both optimize productivity and retention. And they don't have to fight with one another, those two goals or objectives. Now, this is just a report from one CEO of a small but rapidly growing company she said performance thinking, and what she meant was the application of kind of what we're talking about here, has had a measurable impact on my company. Our staff retention rate has increased immensely. And this was a company where they were having pretty high turnover. And she said, new applicants report to us that they hear we're the preferred place to work. Employee satisfaction and engagement have increased as well. It helped us move from being a struggling company to one with the tools to overcome any performance obstacle successfully. Because what they've done is they've been embedded those two models, the performance chain and 6 boxes, into sort of how their managers and leaders addressed human performance issues and engagement issues and retention issues. So it works. And you can even extend this to the point where you can build an entire talent development process based on accomplishments and then how we apply the 6 boxes throughout the cycle. We did another webinar that's on our YouTube channel called something like accomplishment-based talent development, if you want to know more about that. But this can become a core thing for how you do talent development. We have a coaching program that we teach people, and in fact, that QR code on the left, if you point your phone at it, and it's also, I think, on the download that I gave you, you can get to the information about our coaching program. But it simply teaches people how to have conversations with their team members one at a time to define something they're going to work on, and then to use that 6 boxes model to optimize the conditions for it, and to basically have that being an ongoing conversation. So here's some takeaways. One of the things is, and I didn't say a lot about this, but if you talk about the accomplishments or the work outputs in the performance chain, one of the things that's really nice about defining what people contribute rather than just what they do, their decisions, their documents, their widgets, their relationships, etc., the things that are valuable. If you identify those for people, and we do that explicitly in our coaching program, and then you say, you know what, that makes a difference for revenue or customer satisfaction or employee engagement or whatever it is, you can usually connect up outputs or accomplishments to some larger organizational level results. And that makes people feel good when they know how they're contributing. You can also teach your leaders and managers to optimize and align the conditions for employees' contributions. So the little routine that I suggested a few minutes ago of actually engaging your managers and leaders on an ongoing basis in continuously improving those practices is what we're talking about. It's not just one thing, it's all those things and how they work together. And if you do that, if you establish it, and this has always been one of the challenges, everybody talks about coaching. These days, there's coaching programs and books all over the place. Our coaching approach is somewhat different because we're accomplishment-based, so-called, as opposed to behavior-based or sort of therapy-based. And if you put that in place, and if you make that into a regular cadence where your people are continuously, every couple of weeks, checking in, or maybe even more often, and revising and refining this all, you can actually build a culture. You can build a culture where the practice of focusing on development and focusing on engagement is a big deal. And we think that because our models are plain English and straightforward and pretty simple, you can use them as a foundation for all of that, and you can share those up and down and across the organization and see what happens if you try it. So just a couple of shameless commerce things, and I'll see if anybody has any comments or questions. We were interrupted for a couple years with our Summer Institute. Last year we had a great one. This year again, in June 11th to 15th, we're going to have the 12th Summer Institute. And there are people, almost every year, there are people who say, this is a gathering of 30 to 50 people in any given year. It's pretty small, and it's a beautiful, 200 plus acre venue with wonderful food and a lot of engagement with other people. But a lot of folks have said this was the most important, what they say, the most valuable professional development experience of my career. That almost verbatim has been said many years by many people. And a lot of people come back every year. So check it out if you want to learn more about performance thinking. And you can see some testimonials on our YouTube channel at performancethinking.tv, and you can go to performancethinking.com, our website, and right on the front page there's a thing that you can click on to find out about it. And then we teach our performance thinking practitioner program basically certifies performance consultants. It teaches them the methodology based on those models I showed you to systematically go after opportunities to improve, projects, basically. And we generally do that in-house for companies, so we can have a team of 8 to 12 people that we develop together and they learn together. It might be a training and development team, or it might be as a sales enablement group. We just were working on recently, which had people from sales operations and sales training working together, which was very cool because it cut across the silos. But we usually do it in-house. However, we run this as an open program about 3 times a year for anybody who just wants to come as an individual, or small company you might have 2 or 3 people to go. And you can, the next one starts in April, and there's still some seats left. And you can look at our homepage and you'll find a thing to click on there. So that's what I have to say. Let me take a look and see if anybody's left, if anybody has questions or comments. I'm wondering, actually, I see I'm going to call out Therese Longo, just because Therese's company, and Therese led really in this effort by Therese, has been doing career path models based on accomplishments. And that fits pretty nicely into some of this. I'm wondering any comments or questions related to that. As it says, at least on my screen, don't be shy, start chatting. I think in these webinars, I may just lecture too much, because very often it's very quiet at the end. Let me stop my slides, actually. Let's see if anybody has anything to say. And if you don't, I appreciate your participation, or at least your presence. And I think we may have had a Webinar Jam email problem this time, because at least I did not get some of the notices that is supposed to be sent out by our platform, Webinar Jam, to people with the links to this. So I don't know if that's true, but I'll be interested in feedback from people if you had a hard time finding the link to the webinar. But I appreciate your having participated. And I think we're done for the day if there's no comments. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.